Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. To the rescue! Snow White and her prince spent nearly every day together. But one morning the prince told Snow White that he had to leave for a few hours. "I'll miss you," said Snow White. She decided to spend the day in the palace gardens. Snow White changed her dress and set about her gardening. The prince saddled his trusty horse, Aster, and rode to the garden to bid his wife farewell. "Take good care of my prince," Snow White said, slipping a flower into Aster's bridle. Then she gave a flower to the prince. "And take good care of Aster," she said. She smiled and waved as she watched them trot off. The time flew by. Before long, Snow White looked up from the roses she was tending and saw a cloud of dust on the road. A horse was rapidly approaching. "Oh, good!" she exclaimed. "The prince and Aster are home early." She hurried towards the gate to greet them. Imagine Snow White's surprise when she saw that Aster was alone. "Why, where's the prince?" She wondered out loud. Snow White tried not to panic, but she thought the prince had to be in some sort of trouble. "I must go and find him," she declared bravely. Snow White began to walk towards the forest. When she turned around, Aster was there. The horse stamped her hoof and nodded towards her empty saddle. "Do you want me to get on?" Snow White asked. Aster nodded. Quickly the princess pulled herself into the saddle. She barely had time to sit down before Aster was racing towards the forest. Aster ran deeper and deeper into the woods. The princess tried not to think about what dangers might await them on the dark path ahead. After a few moments, Snow White spotted a piece of red cloth that was caught on a long, sharp thorn. It was a scrap torn from the prince's riding cloak. And that wasn't all. As she ducked beneath a low-hanging branch, Snow White glimpsed something red in the puddle. It was the petals from the rose Snow White had given the prince that morning. She tugged on Aster's reins, but the horse charged ahead. Soon they had almost made it to the river. Snow White saw the prince's feathered hat dangling from a limb above the water. As Aster leaped across the river, Snow White reached as high as she could and plucked the hat from the branch. As Snow White clutched the prince's hat to her chest, Aster galloped further into the forest. Straight ahead, four eyes peered out from the shadows. "Oh!" Snow White cried. Aster stopped short. "Well, hello, Hare. I mean, hello there," said a familiar voice. "Doc?" Snow White said with a sigh of relief. "I'm so very glad to see you. I think the prince is in trouble." "Don't worry, Princess," Doc assured her. "We can help you." Doc put his fingers to his lips and whistled. Within seconds, the other dwarves arrived. They were anxious to help Snow White. Let's, let's, Achoo! Let's go," Sneezy cried. "Oh, thank you," Snow White said. "Just follow Aster," she added. She seemed to know the way. The seven dwarves and their ponies followed Snow White and Aster through the depths of the forest and over a deep, rocky canyon. "Oh," said Bashful, looking down. "I hope the prince isn't down there." Finally, they came to a sunny clearing, and Aster slowed to a stop. Snow White spotted the prince lying on the ground. "Oh no!" she cried. She slipped out of the saddle and ran towards the prince. "Don't worry," she called. "I'm coming." Just as Snow White reached the prince, he sat up and stretched. "What a nice nap," he said. "And that was a lovely way to awake. I hope you're hungry." Snow White was bewildered. Next to the prince lay a lavish picnic. "I knew Aster would go get you here quickly," the prince said, beaming. "I even left some clues along the way." Snow White smiled. The prince had planned a lovely surprise. The afternoon had turned out wonderfully. She was so glad he was all right. The prince noticed that the 7 dwarves were already digging into the delicious food. "Well," he said with a laugh, "I'm glad I brought a little extra." "Wait until I tell you about my trip here," Snow White said as she hugged the prince. "You'll never believe it." The end.